What a cheerful way to start our morning. Thank you, Lena. Buongiorno, buenos dias, guten Tag, all of you on Zoom, bonjour, good morning, everyone here in person or on Zoom. Welcome to Granite Peak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm Suki Jones, your worship associate this morning. We extend a warm welcome to all. It's great to see you all here this morning. This is the mission statement of our congregation. We are a compassionate spiritual community that celebrates diversity, nurtures the personal and spiritual growth of all ages, shares our gifts, promotes justice for all, and serves the world we live in. Please join us after the service for socializing in Davis Hall, or for Zoom viewers, stay online for the breakout rooms. If you are here for the first time, please check out our website at prescottuu.org for more information about us. We thank our pianist, Lena Hubin, this morning, our technical helper, Deidre Schwartz, and choir member, Russ Erickson, who will be leading our singing, and also to Fred Krapps and Russ, who are going to be helping with some of the readings and such, so you don't have to listen to my voice the whole time. At this time, please set your phones on worship mode if you haven't done so already, and I think that includes me. Before we begin our service, you know we're a busy congregation. We remind you to read the announcements in the order of service, the weekly peak on our website, and Reverend Patty's videos for updates and announcements. And those should be returning soon because she should be back up here next Sunday. Our regular Zoom meetings are Wednesday forum, Wednesday and afternoon faith development classes, and Friday lunch with the minister. And Bev, Sandra, and Robert, our children's faith development program leaders, are conducting classes across the street in the religious education building. At this time, I'd like to tell you a bit about our speaker today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ernesto Todd Mireles, because I was on the Social Justice Council, Ministry Council, when we awarded him the Lovejoy Award for his lifetime commitment to social justice and his extensive career as a community organizer, educator, and mentor. That was back in 2020, before the pandemic. He has a huge impact on local and national organizing through his own work and through his mentorship of students who become organizers themselves. As Ren Manning noted in her nomination, he has a powerful dedication to changing real conditions in people's lives. Ernesto has a BA in journalism and communication, a master's in social work, and a PhD in American Studies, all from Michigan State University. Take note, all you people here from Ohio State. He is currently on the faculty of Prescott College, teaching their curriculum on social justice. He recently finished writing and directing a documentary on student organizing called War of the Flea, The Fight for Chicano Studies. And he's also the author of an award-winning book, Insurgent Aztlan, The Liberating Power of Cultural Resistance. And we will be hearing more about Aztlan later this morning. We begin our service in the Unitarian Universalist tradition of lighting the chalice. The words this morning are by Tracy Bleakney, translated into Spanish by Teresa Soto. Our chalice lighter is Russ Erickson, who will also be reading our words of gathering and then leading us in the opening hymn. A child travels far from home, fearful and brave, in need of safe harbor. Guided by this chalice, may we seek to understand the causes of flight. Like the comfort of a candle flickering in a window of darkness, let us welcome this child into our home with warmth, nourishment, and love. Would we not want the same for our own child, lost and alone in a strange land? Un niño viaja lejos de su casa, temoroso y valiente, creciendo de un puerto de asilo. Guiados por este cáliz, tratemos de comprender las causas de huir. Como el consuelo de una vela encendida en una ventana oscura, demos bienvenida a este niño a nuestra casa con simpatía, alimento y cariño. ¿No quisiéramos lo mismo por nuestro propio niño perdido y solo en tierra extranjera?
This is our home, but not just ours, by Laura Bogle. We gather here to remember this is our home, but not just ours. The land we live on, this water we drink, the air we breathe, these old mountains that hold us steady to our ground, these forests that give us healing green, these flowers that give us beauty and fragrance, these fields that give us daily bread, these stars that show us our place, the wilderness and the tame backyards, all of it our home. We remember the ancestors who have lived on this land and who have shaped it. The Yavapai, the explorers, the settlers, the miners, the farmers, the ranchers, the immigrants, the artists, the families, the explorers, the business people, the engineers, the builders, the scientists, the teachers, the workers, the leaders. We inherit their choices. We honor the animals and creatures that have made their home in this land, the ones here now and the ones that used to be here. We envision the future generations who will live on this land and let their voices fill our hearts. We gather here to remember this is our home, but not just ours. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Fuente d'amor, ven hacia mí. Ya el corazón, cántale tu compasión. Sopla volar, sube la mar, hacia moldear la justicia de la vida. Arraigame, libérame, fuente d'amor, ven a mí, ven a mí.
Please join me in saying the words of our covenant. Love is the doctrine of this congregation, the quest for truth its sacrament, and service is its prayer. to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community. Thus do we covenant together. Each week, we bring our joys and sorrows to this community, that our sorrows may be carried with the support of others and our joys may be magnified. It is with sadness we are receiving the news of the passing of beloved member Janer Eldridge last Sunday. Our sympathy goes out to Peter and the family. Age 103, she went gently and peacefully in her own home, surrounded by those who loved her. A celebration of life is planned for late September. We also join in support of Hugh Meyer, who is away with Norma attending the memorial service of his daughter, Kim. Let us be silent for a moment. May our hearts speak silently our soul's greatest joys and deepest sorrows. For all the concerns and joys not spoken aloud today, may our spirit embrace you and our love fill your heart. Please sing these words of comfort. I believe Bev has something she needs to tell us this morning. Come on up, Bev. I'm getting lots of sign language here.
Good morning, everyone. I am retiring. Woohoo! Today is my last day officially as your faith development coordinator. We have a wonderful young woman that's going to be taking my place. In fact, she's been practicing really good with me and Robert. So anyway, what I just realized is that, boy, do we need some help, because we not only have a child in the nursery, but we just received 3 new children in the other side. So if you are willing, able, maybe once a month to help us either in the nursery or across the street. Now, Robert and I are going to hang out. You're not getting rid of us. So, but yeah, right. So I just wanted to let you all know that I'm going to turn my keys in today.
Well, there's a great example of a joy and a sorrow in one announcement. Congratulations, Bev. What joy for you in your retirement, and what sorrow for us that you will no longer be leading our children's faith development, but we know that you're leaving it in good hands with Sandra. As we prepare to take the offering this morning, let us embrace the feeling of community and connection that we have when we gather here each week. Let us remember that this congregation and its programs are supported by your generosity. We also give back to the greater community through our Seeds of Support program. This month's recipient is the Coalition for Compassion and Justice. Please read about them in your order of service. To give online, go to prescottuu.org/giving. On the bottom left-hand side, click on Support Granite Peak. The link is also available in the chat on this video. May we give in love and in hope. Now, please enjoy our offertory music. We acknowledge the generosity of spirit expressed in this offering. What is given in love is received in gratitude. Blessed be. Okay, things got a little changed around here this morning. So right now, I'm going to invite Fred up for the reading. And this is not Deidre's problem. This is my problem. So Fred, if you would come up and do the reading now.
I just wanted to take a moment before we began this reading to thank all those people who 3 times managed to finally get the right painting, I believe, on the steps. Let's have a warm heart. So does everybody agree? Everybody like that new color we have today? Yeah? Okay, great. Okay. Decolore, yes. Yeah, absolutely perfect. I didn't think of it that way. Suki and Lena Hubin had a long discussion about including the song De Colores in today's service. Suki's reaction was, not again. But she came across these stories by 2 women active with the United Farm Workers in the 1960s, as was our speaker today, Ernesto, in the 1990s, was it, I believe? Yes. And they changed her mind. First, the words of Kathy Magura. I remember singing De Colores at the weekly Friday night strike meetings that were held in Delano. Cesar ran the meeting, asking for reports from the picket captains. He would make comments and provide information about outside support, which always brought a rousing applause. I kept minutes in a gray ledger book that also was used for marking off the $5 weekly stipend that was distributed at the end of the meetings. I wasn't aware of that. Were other people aware of that? Did that continue on?
The stipend?
The stipends.
It continued while they had money.
While they had money,
Yeah. I mean, that was, well, yeah, that's a whole. While they had money.
Every meeting ended with us joining hands and singing De Colores, with enhanced a sense of community, of being connected in a struggle for justice. We continued to sing it in the decades following those early meetings, during union events and other gatherings, often as a closing. The rooster, the hen, the chicks that sing, the great loves of many colors. These images brought such joy, such pleasure, and lastly, for those who sang it, such hope. In the words of Abby Rivera, I was familiar with De Colores as a child, but never learned all the words until I was with the union. We sang it all the time, before, during, or after membership or staff meetings, at special events, at funerals, at memorial services. We always stood with arms crossed in front, reaching to the right and to the left to hold hands with someone else. I grew extremely weary of this song early on, till I discovered something uncanny about it. Here we go again, I would sometimes say to myself, and make many faces. Then we would begin to sing. In the first few lines, my entire demeanor and attitude would change. By the time the song was over, a total transformation of my spirit would occur, making me glad that I had sung it after all. It came to be considered my spiritual cleansing song because the words reached deep into my soul and took me to another place where things are perfect, in harmony, and like mind and purpose. It is easy to understand why this simple song has survived centuries. And we will later on have a chance to hear it again. So it is my honor today, I guess, I suppose it's all right if an Ohio Stater welcomes a Michigan Stater.
Always be united in our distrust of U of M.
Okay. Oh, anyway, it is my pleasure to welcome Ernesto, our speaker for today's service. Ernesto.
Oh, it's a Zoom screen. Haven't seen one of those in about 20 minutes. Let's see. What a beautiful service. Like, seriously, this is even the music, I think, is really reflective of the sort of long range ties that we all have. I mean, Celito Lindo and Paloma Blanca. I mean, these are polkas, right? That absolutely show German influence, you know, in Mexican music. I mean, the only thing that was missing was the accordion. And I was like, wow, we're gonna have a dance in here. This was very well played on the piano. Thank you. Yes. But I think, so the title of the talk is Seduced by the Sphinx of Aztlan. Actually, I always think that that's the name of the book that I'm going to tell you about, but it's actually Wooed by the Sphinx of Aztlan. But I guess that sort of translates into 21st century as seduced. I know they don't mean the same thing exactly, but yeah. So it's the title of the book I'm going to talk about is Wooed by the Sphinx of Aztlan. But we have a complicated relationship, right, in this country between descendants of European settlers and Native people who live here in the United States or in the Americas. Now, I use the term Native people, speaking primarily about Mexicans, Mexican Americans at this point, but I want to sort of contextualize it in that way and to really think about this this complicated relationship that we have, right? I mean, even with the music, to think about the way that we've influenced each other over the centuries. And to think about how for a lot of us, that's a subject of joy, right? Of something that we can feel good about. But then also understanding that there's so many people who are very upset about it. Like they don't want to think about these influences. They refuse to acknowledge them, the influences that we've had on each other. Real quick history lesson. Let me move this. This is a good mic. It works really well. Let me, real quick history lesson. In 1492, Columbus sailed to, he was trying to reach India. We all know this story. He couldn't quite get there because there was a gigantic landmass in the way that nobody really knew about, right? But that's, I think, that's one of the important pieces of this, is that they just didn't know it was there. So if you look at maps from that time, maps that were created in that time were called the Orbis Terram, right? And it divided the world into 3 hemispheres: Europe, Asia, and Africa, right? And it right smack dab in the middle of that T that it created was Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was like the center of the world. That was the map of the world. So they didn't know that we were here. This contact is made. For the first 50 years after that contact, one of the biggest theological debates was, are these actually people? And well, and we think about it, right? But they didn't know, they didn't know anybody was here. So, but what they're saying is, are these actually people? Do they have a soul? Can they be recipients of Christ's sacrifice, right? This is the question that they debate for like 50 years. They finally decide that Native people in the Americas are people, and that they do have a soul. And as a result of that, they can be converted to Christianity. I'm not sure if that was actually the best thing that happened at that point. But it could, I mean, maybe it would have been worse if they had decided that we weren't people. I don't know. But I will say, what I say is this, is that there was a lot of writing that was going on, right? Because people were writing letters and there was back and forth. So there's this huge body of literature that's established where these Spaniard conquistadors are explaining to the rest of the world what people here in the Americas are like, right? This is one of our first, they didn't call it this then, but it develops into this thing that we now call travel literature, right? Where people travel to places and then they write about them, you know, the water's so blue, you can see all the way to the ground, you know, that kind of thing. Now, what's also important to remember is that the Spanish were here in the Americas 100 years before the English got here, right? Which means that the English had 100 years to study all of the letters and the writings and the books and everything that had been published by the Spaniards. Yeah, so this is where it gets interesting, right? Because the other thing to remember is that England and Spain were in a death duel for who was going to control the world at that time. Now we know, looking back, right, that it was Britain that, you know, became ascendant, but they're like in the 1400s and the 1500s, that wasn't so clear cut that that's what was going to happen. So out of this conflict between England and Spain emerges this thing called the Black Legend, right? Where because of the fact that Spain had been conquered by the Moors, the Spanish were portrayed by the British as a miscegenated race, right? That they were part African, part whatever. And so as a result, you know, they were ugly and they were evil and, you know, and they were Catholic on top of that, right? So that legend, that Black legend kind of gets translated onto Mexican Aboriginals by the English in their writing. And there's a really interesting article. It's called The Origins of Anti-Mexican Sentiments by a man named Raymond Paredes, where he talks about these, lays out the sort of publishing and the writing that was happening in the early 1600s by English settlers who were here on the East Coast. So this whole stage is sort of set, right? You have this conflict that's been going on for a couple hundred years between these two European nations. These ideas are translated over to the Aboriginals that were here. So I want to give you one last piece of the puzzle before I kind of move on to this. When Cortez entered Mexico Tenochtitlan and he was talking with Montezuma, he said to Montezuma, "Where are you guys from?" Right? And Montezuma said, "Oh, we came from this place called Aztlan. It's way over there, right? It's like way north of here." And historians say that Montezuma was trying to get Cortez to leave by telling him that this place called Aztlan was north of where Mexico Tenochtitlan is, or in what we know now is like central Mexico, right? Okay, so the story gets relayed and, you know, they write about it, they send it back, you know, people know this whole story. All right, so we fast forward to, I would say, well, let's say 1793. That's the first newspaper article I found. In 1793, an article runs in the Hartford Courant, I think it is, in Connecticut, right? Has a story, front page, that talks about the origins of the Aztecs. This is in 1793, right? And it talks about how they came from Aztlan. So that's pretty interesting. But what we begin to see, right, as we piece together sort of the newspaper trail, is that this is a story, or some variation of this story runs hundreds of times throughout, maybe 100 times, close to 100 times throughout the 1800s, right? So there's this real interest. It's always from this archaeological standpoint, but it's always talking about the origins of the Aztecs. It's talking about that being Aztlan, and it's saying that it's somewhere within the boundaries of the United States, right? Now, these are mainstream, you know, white newspapers, right? Like in Hartford and down in Georgia and, you know, Michigan and, you know, all of these places. So it's not like radical Chicano literature, right? And there's these people, they keep retelling this story. So Prescott, the city that we live in, was founded in 1864. Yeah, it was 1864. Okay. One of the original, there were 4 names that were put forward to call this city. One of those names was Aztlan, they wanted to call this Aztlan, Arizona. Now, if you drive down, where's the Aztlan Mason Temple? It's not far from here, actually. It's just like back up Willow Creek, just back up the next block, right? So when I first moved here, that was the first thing I saw was this thing that said Aztlan Cemetery, because it's right over by Prescott College. And I was like, wow, that's really trippy. Like, what is this? Especially as a Chicano studies scholar, I was just like, why is this called Aztlan Cemetery? And then I saw the Mason Temple, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. But it wasn't until over the pandemic that I started to really dig into it, because I just had a whole bunch of time on my hands, right? So as we were going through Charlotte Hall, I saw this sign. It's right up on the wall. I said, these are the names that this is what they wanted to call Prescott. And it gives these 4 names. I don't remember what the other ones are, but Aztlan, really jumped out at me. So as I was doing this, so I was like, okay, that's interesting. There's a whole bunch of things that could have been going on in 1864. But one of the things I think is really important to remember as part of context is that in 1864 in this area, there were active campaigns against Indigenous people, right? There was still open fighting that was going on. And so the fort over here, whose name I constantly forget, but Whipple, that's it. My wife works there. She's a therapist with the VA. That was a military installation, right? Where they would send troops out to make sure the areas were secure and to fight against what they called renegade Indians. They published a newspaper out of there. I think it was called the Arizona Daily Miner or something like that. And they reported on, all of these events, but they particularly reported on the Aztlan Lodge. There was always something about the Aztlan Lodge in there. And so what we see is that the founding fathers of Prescott, the Goldwaters and people like that, were all members of this thing that they call the Aztlan Lodge. In 1888, so the picture starts to build, and and my biggest question was why, right? Like, why is this happening? But what I also began to realize is that I was looking at it from a 21st century standpoint that had to do, that was also, the lens was also clouded by all of the anti-immigration and like severe anti-Mexican propaganda and rhetoric that had, popped up really over the last 40 years. Like I'm particularly starting with like Prop 187 in Arizona. I'm not in Arizona, in California, the Show Me Your Papers, the first real Show Me Your Papers. But in 1888, this guy, George Hartman, writes a book called Wooed by the Sphinx of Aztlan. Well, the Sphinx of Aztlan is Thumb Butte. And so they used to call Thumb Butte the Sphinx of Aztlan. So, to me, the plot thickens, right? You're just like, okay, so what is it that, what is it that these guys are trying to accomplish? I think the biggest thing that they were trying to accomplish was that they were trying to do 2 things. One, I think that they were trying to increase tourism here. As weird as that may sound, right? Like this is the place where the Aztecs come from. But the other thing is, if we really think about it, is what that means is that there had to have been some widespread knowledge of what all of that meant. Otherwise, everybody would be like, why, who cares, right? So I guess the point being, at least the point for me, as I think about this, is that there's a lot of people that knew about this, right? So after the Civil War, the president, I think maybe it was Grover Cleveland, he had a train built, and this train it was like Air Force One of that time, right? And they would take this train all over. And each compartment served a different function. The very first compartment on that presidential train was called the Aztlan. And so there's all these newspaper articles about this presidential train that they put together. And, they talk about the Aztlan and they, what they do in the Aztlan and, in this compartment and the other compartments. Fascinating, right? Because when you I think that the biggest thing is that we tend to think of impermanent things permanently, right? Like a border is actually an impermanent thing, right? It's imaginary to the extent that there's nothing natural about it. Like you put a seed in the ground and that seed will produce the plant that it's supposed to be, right? It won't ever grow something else other than what that seed is for. That's fixed within nature. Borders are not fixed within nature, right? And so it's this line that people draw and they say, okay, we're on this side, you're on that side. You can't come over on this side. But it's still an impermanent thing in the sense that until we created it, it didn't exist before, right? Which means that at some point in the future, most likely won't exist again because it's impermanent, right? But we tend to think of these things as permanent. That's why people say, build a wall, build a fence. You know, we have to stop this, whatever this is, we have to stop this. So another way of thinking about this is this. My great grandmother was born in like 1889, right? I knew her. I was a little boy, but I knew her. I was probably like 5 years old or 6, maybe 7 or 8 when she died. When she was born, they were still fighting Indians in Arizona. And I knew her, right? We tend to think of impermanent things as permanent, right? This is how much time we're actually talking about, right? We're talking about that, you know, but we think of it as like, oh, this is the way that it's always been, right? But it's not the way that it's always been. I knew somebody who was alive when the United States government was still killing Indians. Crazy. It's mind-blowing. Like if you start to think about your own relationships in that way, you know, and putting it within that context. So I talked about one of the earliest news articles I found was in 1793 that explains the origins of Aztlan. And then throughout the 19th century, this series of articles is a variation on the same article, right? It's always almost the same, slightly different. These are, there are the bloodthirsty Aztecs of Mexico. They came from this place called Aztlan. They lived in this city that was like the Venice. This was the headline for many of these articles, the Venice of Mexico, right? Because they're talking about Xochimilco and the canals that people would, you know, go through to get to the gardens and all these other kinds of things. But always this same article, always running, continuously running in different places. Now, what's interesting is you look into the 1800s, as you move into the 1900s, what begins to happen is that this article continues to circulate. It's basically the same article that ran in 1793, which is kind of mind-blowing when you stop and think about it, right? But as the Mexican presence in the United States increases, the occurrence of this particular article decreases. They go like this, right? So in 1930 is the first census where the United States government put Mexican as a category. There were 3 million people who slotted that they were Mexican in 1930. In 1970, there were 9 million people that slotted that they were Mexican. In 2010, there were 40 million plus, right? So what you also begin to see is the dramatic, like the exponential growth within the population. So as these articles go like this article fades away. This one article that's talking about Aztlan fades away. That's been in use for, I mean, you know, over 100 years, right? It's the same article in use for over 100 years. In 1969, there was a conference in Denver, Colorado. It's called the Chicano Youth Conference. And this conference is the turning point in this whole story. I think it's also the turning point in a lot of the immigration struggle that's going on. Because what happens is a poet, young man at the time, who called himself Ayurista, not his real name, what is the name that he goes by, or that he writes under, writes a poem that he calls El Plan de Aztlan. And in this thing that he wrote, which was kind of like a poem, he talks about how Aztlan is a free nation of pueblos, and how the land belongs to us, and that kind of thing. Very, very poetic language. In the days that followed that conference, the Associated Press wrote a very short article. It's like 2 paragraphs long. And this 2-paragraph article appears all over the country in these different newspapers. And basically what it says is, there was a conference in Denver. All these so-called people who call themselves Chicanos were there. And they said that they want to form a new nation called Aztlan. That's basically what these 2 paragraphs say, right? From that point forward, in 1969, the number of occurrences in daily newspapers skyrockets to thousands of the use of the word Aztlan, because Aztlan theater and the Aztlan dance troupe and the Aztlan softball team, and I mean, it just explodes. It's a little crazy. So that's like in the 60s and the 70s, it starts to pick up. But what happens is that in the 1980s, this is where you see this rise of these really conservative newspaper commentators who start saying, hey, what's this Aztlan thing about, right? What does that mean? What do they mean that they want their own country? What do they mean that this is their land, right? And so this is where that sort of interrogation really starts to begin, because up until that point, there hadn't been any claims like that made, right? That claim is made in 1969, like right at the beginning of the 70s, that claim starts to be made. But what's also happening as they're interrogating that is that the actual population of Mexican Americans is starting to like skyrocket, right? So what they're really looking at is, I mean, what I think they think that they're looking at is like some sort of like hostile takeover, So we look at this we look at this throughout the 80s, and we know that Reagan was the last president, I think, to do an amnesty. Was Reagan the last president to do an amnesty? Well, he certainly did do one, right? And that, so that made a whole bunch of people, that gave a whole bunch of people documents. So we move on to the 90s, the population continues to explode. We move into the 2000s, the population begins to skyrocket. And in 2004, this gentleman named Samuel Huntington, who had been a very important advisor to many Republican presidents and was part of, it wasn't the Tricontinental, I'll remember it in a second. He writes an article for this journal that he publishes called Foreign Policy. The title of the journal is the Hispanic Challenge. And basically what Huntington says in this journal is, if we don't stop the flow of immigration from Latin America, the fundamentally white Anglo-Saxon Protestant nature of the United States will change, and we will become a Latin American country, right? That's a real summary. He says some other things that are real doozies. But right after 2004, what happens in 2006? Millions of people are marching in the street. Millions of Latinos, Mexican Americans, other Latinos begin marching in the street for immigration reform. Millions, right? In LA, down in Phoenix, million people in Phoenix, million people in LA, people marching all over the country. That's in 2006. In 2008, they're all gone. Because this is when these mass deportations that we're fighting against right now really begin, is like in 2008. And so this is also here in Arizona in 2010. You see the outlawing of Mexican American studies, the the Show Me Your Papers, right? Arpaio. And so if we start all the way to the back, if we go back to the beginning of what we're talking about, right? What we see is that there is an intense interest in this idea of Aztlan. I would say it's intense, right? Considering the fact that, I mean, it doesn't really specifically have anything to do with the United States, right? But this idea is kept alive through these newspaper articles. And it serves a certain purpose in othering Mexican natives, right? As, you know, these tribal, sort of bloodthirsty kind of individuals who, you know, come from this thing. It also creates this this sense of difference, I think, between Mexican Indians and Indians here in the United States. It makes us, it tries to portray us as maybe a little more advanced, right? So to kind of claim that legacy, but at the point where the community says, where the community who owns this history or who this history comes from reclaims that, then it starts to become a threat, right? So when we think about being wooed by the Sphinx of Aztlan, I think it serves a double purpose. I mean, for the original people, the settlers who came here, I mean, they really saw it as a, I mean, they really saw this place as a paradise, which I think probably before, you know, climate change, it probably really was a real paradise around here, right? But there's also a generation or generations now of other people who have been wooed by the Sphinx of Aztlan and thinking about, like, what does it mean to be liberated? What does it mean to end colonialism, right? What does it mean to resume a national identity, right? What do all these things mean for individuals who have labored under this sort of exploitation and oppression, not just for decades, but for centuries now? And how does an idea like this live for centuries? I mean, that's, I think, the other part that's just really kind of incredible, you know? So I think when we think about immigration, I will go back to my original statement. We all have a complicated relationship with each other, right? I know that immigration is an issue of human rights and dignity and people being able to just, you know, move, right? To be able to go from this place to that place unimpeded. That should be our right as human beings. But I think that we also have to understand the power dynamics that go along with this, not to explain them or to, you know, explain them away or to, you know, anything like that. But I think that in understanding the history and the power dynamics of what's going on, it helps us also to really see that we're not just going to be able to say to people, you shouldn't treat people like this, right? Because people have been treated like this for centuries now. I mean, it's not an anomaly, the way that things are happening. I'll leave you with this thought. There was a recent study that came out that I would be happy to share with you all. It was a demographic breakdown of the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th of last year. And one of the biggest things that I took away from it was that the majority of the people who went there all came from counties that had lost white population. And so, yeah, I mean, you gotta really let that one sink in for a second, right? And then also 2020 was the first census since the United States has taken the census where the white population in this country decreased. Because that's not just about immigration, although it is about immigration, right? That's also, I think, about the attacks on women's rights and the right of women to choose and have control over their bodies. So there's, I think, you know, instead of simplifying things, I think we have to find ways to complicate them so that we understand or we can see, you know, a bigger viewpoint of it. That's what I had for today. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that totally new perspective on our history and excellent comments. And Ernesto asked me ahead of time if there would be a chance for questions, and he doesn't know you guys. If we took questions right now, we would be here for another half hour. So we're going to go ahead with the concluding the service, and then we can stay up here and you can ask questions, or we can go into Davis Hall and just have informal conversations in there, whatever it seems to work out for you. And I left my glasses over here. So we are now going to sing hymn 298, Wake Now My Senses. Maybe let's just do the first two verses. Does that work? Okay.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with a web of creation your vow. Giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime.
Our closing prayer is taken from A Prayer for Immigrants by Jessica Vasquez Torres. Source of life, who is known by many names, we gather with gratitude for the earth and all who journey in it. We give thanks for the interconnectedness of all creation. We declare openly the times we have fallen short from living out the call to justice our sacred stories place upon us. Source of justice, who is known by many names, let us not swerve from the path of righteousness that leads to just and equitable relationship. Open our eyes that we may see the immigrant and undocumented whose labor enables and sustains our living, the farm worker, the hotel maid, the line cook, the childcare provider, the healthcare worker. Give us courage to stand with those crossing our borders, escaping economic oppression and political persecution, seeking work to support their families, aspiring to participate in the bounty of the creation. Give us the strength to confront the prejudice and intolerance of those who are fearful and respond by closing our borders to those who sojourn, seeking life and opportunity. Source of direction, who is known by many names. In our daily living, let us be guided by the highest estimate of the worth and dignity of every person, regardless of their legal status. And let us not forget that the creation is founded on justice, and that we have the moral responsibility to bring forth justice into these times. Amen, and may it be so. And now we get to sing De Colores. Sing and play and whatever you need to do.
All the colors, yes, the colors we see in the springtime with all of its flowers. All the colors, when the sunlight shines out through a rift in the clouds and it showers. All the colors, as a rainbow appears when the storm cloud is touched by the sun. All the colors de colores he visto los campos en la primavera. Ay, los colores, de colores en la pilarita que vienes de fuera. De colores es al arco iris que vienes lucir. Y por eso los grandes amores, muchos colores me gustan a mí. Y leas de amores de muchos colores te gustan a mí.
So now we're going to extinguish the chalice because that's what we do next. With the extinguishing of our chalice, our worship time has ended, and now our service begins. Please join me in saying these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. This is our time to greet friends and visitors. And for those on Zoom, you may go ahead and go to breakout rooms if you choose. Are there any visitors here for the first time or after a long time gone? And if you don't mind, please, we'd love it if you would stand and introduce yourselves and speak really loudly because I'm hard of hearing. Hi. Thank you. Welcome back. That was Wally and Kat. Okay, who used to be coming, but COVID kind of kept them away. So we're glad to have you back here with us. Anyone else for the first time? Yes. Eric. Welcome, Eric. Okay, any other folks? Hi. Wonderful, thank you. So we have Kathy with us, who has only been here for 1 week, and she's here. Thank you for coming. But gee, it sounds like you made us first on your list. I don't know. Thank you. Okay, any other brave souls? Okay, well, thank you all for coming. And this is take a time to greet your neighbor, and especially say hi to the folks that are with us for the first time. And then you can continue your conversations out in Davis Hall, unless people want to stick around here and ask questions in here of Ernesto. Or do you want to just head out there and get your coffee and talk to him there? Ernesto says coffee, so I think